In this video, we are going to look at the basics of using Orthanc through the newer Orthanc Explorer 2 interface. This is not an installation video, and we're not going to go deeply into configuration files or APIs. This is simple applications training. How to get into Orthanc, how to find studies, how to open a study, how to view basic DICOM information, and how to understand what this interface is actually showing you. For anyone not familiar with Orthanc, it is a free, open source, lightweight DICOM server. In plain language, it can receive, store, display, send, and help manage DICOM imaging studies. So, in other words, you can think of it as a local free PACS. Now, there's a bit of a stretch there, and I would admit this. It's not truly a replica of what a commercial PACS is, but for all intents and purposes, this is how we are going to be using this. Now, it's often used for learning, testing, research, integration work, and very importantly, non-diagnostic workflows. The key here is non-diagnostic. It is open source, so that means that it is free to use, free to install, free to modify, but that also means that it does not have any approvals with respect to diagnostic viewing or diagnostic type work. Once we log in, the first thing to understand is that Orthanc Explorer 2 is organized around studies. That is important because many PACS users think in terms of patients first, but this interface is primarily a study list. You can still filter by patient information, such as patient name, for example. If I type this, patient name in here, I can see all the studies for patient Doe Archibald. But still, primarily, this is a study list. The main working object here is the imaging study. Now, another thing that's important to point out, and this is building on our previous point, that this is not a radiology reporting work list. What we're looking at here is a list of DICOM studies that Orthanc knows about. And from here, we can do all kinds of filtering, searching, opening viewing, and all the other stuff that we want to do with those studies. Now, as far as filtering is concerned, that's actually a very useful feature. So what you can see out here is you see a bunch of columns at the top. Fairly standard stuff: patient birth date, name, ID, things of that nature. And immediately below, there's a little box in which you can put in a specific value that the system will search against. So we already did this with the patient name. So if I type in the last name Doe, and everyone that matches that last name will show up. In this case, obviously only one patient for us. Same thing goes for patient ID. If I type in the patient ID, let's say I have a large list of patients, but I do know the patient ID of a specific patient, a specific study that I'm looking for. That's a way to get to it. Same thing goes for study description. Again, I can type in a study description, and if we have a match, an exact match of characters, well, then it is going to display before you. Important thing to point out that there's no artificial intelligence or anything of that nature here, so it doesn't actually know that CXR means chest x-ray. It simply is looking for an exact match in the characters within the study description. The next important thing is, how do you open a study? That's a big one, so let's take a look at this. Now, a DICOM study usually contains one or more series, and each series normally contains at least one, but usually more than one images, or to be more accurate in DICOM terms, DICOM instances. But anyways, the basic structure, of course, as you know, is patient to study. And again, we remember that that's the kind of list that we're seeing here in Orthanc. It's study-based. Studies contain series, and series in turn contain images or instances. Now, as I click on any given study, I'm presented with the first subset of information, and this is a bunch of information that pertains to this study. So if you look at any given attribute out here, you'll note that it all starts with study because it describes this specific study: study date, study time, study description. I personally actually find this quite useful. The way this is organized, not every system is organized in that exact fashion, but Orthanc most certainly is. Now, another convenient thing here is you can see that this patient has 4 studies in total. You can click on this and show the studies, another quite useful thing. Now, for us, though, we're going to continue looking at this, and this particular study only happens to have one series, so not too many. Usually, studies have more than one, and I'll show you that in a second. However, within this series, we now have instances, and again, there's only one instance out here. So quite honestly, this is, let's take a look at a different study. Let's get rid, how would I do this? That's another important thing. Let's get rid of the filtering. The reason why I'm only seeing one study out here is because of this filter out here. If I remove it, then it's open season, and any study that exists can be easily viewed. Now, you can see out here that, for example, in this last column, it shows you number of series and number of instances. That's what this means. So 5 series, 62 instances or images. So if I click on this specific study, now again, bunch of information pertaining to the study. I find this well organized. After that, we've got a number of series. Now, this is more correlated, this is more aligned with what you would see with real production, if you will, data. What do we see out here? Well, we see 2 localizers and then 2 series containing actual diagnostic images. Again, I can click on any given series, and then another subsection or another panel, if you will, pops up in which you can see a number of attributes, but now they're all pertaining to the series level. So we've moved down one level. We went from study to series. And then within this specific series, we have a number of instances. Again, this works quite well for teaching because you can see for any given instance number, it immediately provides you an SOP instance UID. And as you probably know, this is a pretty important number in the world of DICOM because this is how we actually determine what any given instance or image, because that's what it means, how is it identified by your specific system. And then what I'm presented with here is the actual DICOM header. And you can see that this is actually the entirety of the header containing all relevant metadata. Now, you can see that for any given attribute, as we call it, for any given tag, it all starts with, of course, the group number and the element number, the standard way to identify a tag in DICOM. After that, we have the description. And then lastly, we have the value itself. Now, a very convenient button out here is this one allows you to copy the value into clipboard. Now, obviously, once you copy anything into the clipboard, you can paste it anywhere you'd like. You can paste it to save locally or even to search for something directly here in Orthanc. For example, accession number, just to give you an example, obviously this is unique for that study, so it's only going to find the one. But if we needed it, I can obviously copy this and then paste into the respective field right here, accession number. So that's that functionality of filtering. So just Control V in here, press Enter, and obviously the only study that matches that specific accession number is now displayed. Now, if you're a clinical user, you may say to me, well, this is all great. How do I open this study? And that's a very good question, a very valid one. Now, because Orthanc, we think of it as a PACS, obviously you have the ability to use different kind of viewers out here, which is actually quite nice. The easiest way to open any study is to click on this eyeball right here. So you can click on that, and your default viewer, which in this case happens to be the OHIP viewer, very capable, and please watch out for a separate video, is going to open and allow you to view your images. Now, note out here that there are some buttons that don't seem to be available. And the reason why they're not available is because you have to actually check this box, and after that, they become available to you. Now, what's nice about them is you can hover over any given button, and then it'll actually tell you what the button does. Now, a lot of these buttons have to do with what type of integrated viewer do you have here. In my particular case, the first couple of buttons all have to do with the OHIP viewer, which is the main one for my install, but that is not necessarily the case for everybody. So you do have to check and see what your specific install entails. For example, for Mini, the very latest install, as an example, if you download it, will actually have that eyeball take you to what's called Stone Web Viewer. Another web viewer, also very capable, but it's possible to change things around if needed. Now, for me, like I said, the first couple of buttons all have to do with different components of OHIP viewer. And then after that, you have a couple of PACS-like functionality. So the ability to download, ability to delete, and ability to add a label. In fact, to be more precise, this button right here allows you to add or modify or remove labels. Now, but that's all great. The bigger question is, what are labels? And that's actually a very interesting feature that we should take a look at more closely. Adding a label allows you to create a work list of sorts, which is actually quite interesting. Now, if you look at the actual pop-up menu out here, obviously at the top is the remove all. That's what allows us to remove all the labels. Quite honestly, we don't have any added yet, so perhaps let's do that. Now, the instructions are right before you. In order to add a label, you simply type it in, and then you press enter, and that creates a new label. If I click add, it adds it to this specific study. Now, as I close this, I want you to note that under all local studies, we now have two lists: without labels, which is everything but that one study that we've added the label to, or test label, which only has that one anonymous study, at least at the moment. Now that we've added a label, I can actually add it or tag any study with that specific label. So, for example, I can click on this guy out here, this study, and then I go over to my labels button. And then now I actually have a drop down because I've created a label, and I can assign label test to this specific study. And if we were to go to the test work list, you can see that there are now two studies. Now, again, we can obviously remove those as well. So again, same story. I just select which study I want to apply the changes to, go to the Edit Labels button, and at this point, I can remove them all as an example. Click Close, and you'll note that the list will update, and we now only have one study left, which is the only one that has that label assigned. It's possible to add more than one label to a singular study. So for example, out here, I can go back to my label menu, and you see that I have the test available already, but suppose I want to add another label. So I just type in my other label name, let's call it research, press enter, and by saying add, it's now been added to the studies. So therefore, you can see that this specific study now has two labels applied to it: research and test. Now, we remember that if we go out here, this is how we remove all of those labels from this study. That's great, but what if I only want to remove the one? Can we do that? And yes, you absolutely can. In order to do that, you click on the study itself, and now you can see that each label has a little X out here. And as I click on one of these, that specific label has now been removed. So therefore, labels are a very useful option that allows you to add additional custom-made attributes and then sort by them by creating a work list of sorts. So this effectively is your workflow element within Orthanc. Now, another thing you probably noticed is that if I click on any given study and that study panel opens up, now there's a bunch of tools out here that I can press on as well. And note that unlike the ones at the top, they're automatically activated. That simply has to do with the fact that we clicked on a specific study and Orthanc knows which study to apply those tools to. Now, largely they are the same, although there's a couple of new ones that appear here. So the first three all have to do with different components of OHIP viewer. Regular open an OHIP, OHIP with volume rendering, and OHIP in segmentation mode. Then we have the button to download this as a zip. Very useful. We can delete the study altogether from PACS, and we can also modify, anonymize, and add a series. Now, as we look at the first manager out here, the modify really allows us to do two things out here. We can either change patient information or modify study tags. As we change patient information, and you will see that one of the key identifier, or the key identifier, in fact, is the patient ID. This is what uniquely identifies a patient. Now, we're able to modify that patient ID field. And by doing so, we have three options. We can modify the original study, generating new DICOM UIDs, modify the original study while keeping the original DICOM UIDs, and then lastly, create a modified copy of the original study, and then also keep the original study. Now, the key thing to understanding here is DICOM UID. As I'm sure you know, DICOM UIDs are unique identifiers that identify just about everything in the world of DICOM. Here's an example of a study instance UID. So, in other words, this really long number that uniquely identifies a study. If I look at a series, there would be a series instance UID. So there it is. There's this unique identifier. And then, of course, as we move down to the instance, each instance is going to have its own unique identifier as well. So going back to what this is talking about here, if we go and modify something at the patient level, as we are generating a new patient ID, for example, if I added the letter A here, this would clearly be a different patient ID. The options basically are saying, do you want to modify the original study and create fresh identifiers for each level? In other words, getting rid of any previous references that your software might have. So, fresh start. Your second option is modify the original study, but only modify the patient ID. Don't touch the DICOM UID. So, any type of references will still point to that same study. And your third option is create two studies. One of them is going to have the old UIDs, and the second one is going to have brand new generated UIDs and now new patient ID. Now, the second option out here is to move down to the study level. So the first option was the patient level. The second option is the study level. And as I click on modify study tags, you can see that there's a number of different attributes that we can modify out here. Now, this is important to understand what we're talking about here, right? What are these attributes? Now, you can see them if we go and look at study level attributes. There they are. Each one of these is a different DICOM tag. And if we drill down all the way to the instance level, and then you can see the entirety of the DICOM header, then anything that operates at the study level or anything that denotes something at the study level are basically the tags that we are talking about here when we're modifying something at the study level. Now, you've got a couple of pre-canned ones that are standard tags that you can go ahead and modify to whatever it is that you want to be. You also have the ability to insert a DICOM tags, and there are two options available for you: other patient IDs and requesting physician. Now, modifying them is fairly straightforward. This is what's called tag morphing, where you actually modify the value within those tags. And you've got the three options, same three options. Modify the original study and generate new DICOM UIDs. So in other words, you modify these tags that you see on screen, and you also modify the DICOM UID tags. So fresh start. Modify the original study, but keep the original UIDs. So keep all the references and just change what you're looking at here. And then the last option, of course, create two studies, the original and the new one. The next feature is arguably one of the most useful ones. This is the ability to anonymize the study that you've selected. Now, clearly, this is something that we might want to do for a variety of reasons. Anytime you use patient data, you kind of want to make sure that it's anonymized. So that's very, very important. And you can see that out here, you're basically blinking out most of the DICOM tags, but you have the ability to create a mock patient ID, mock patient name, and then obviously, mock study description. Now, I must mention that what you see out here, this is just the front end, right? So there's actually a lot of DICOM tags that directly relate to identifying a patient on one level or another. And what Orthanc will do is Orthanc will use the anonymization profile, and you can actually define what that anonymization profile will do. That can be done through the configuration, but what you see out here obviously are key fields that you can choose replacement values for, if you will, so that you can easily find your anonymized copy. Again, just to reiterate that Orthanc will blank any DICOM tags that are included in the anonymization profile, so that you cannot identify which patient did the study come from. And again, what exactly gets blinked can be defined by modifying the JSON anonymization profile. And then the last feature is the easiest one, but this is a really cool feature. So adding a series, just the way it sounds, we can add an additional series, and we can drop a single file in here as exactly as the instructions tell us to. Now, what's nice about this one is if I select a file, I can take any one. You can see I have a bunch of screenshots out here. So I'll take a PNG, I'll open it, and then now what Orthanc is going to do is it's going to what we call DICOM wrap it. So effectively, it's going to add a bunch of DICOM tags to the image, and by marrying the two together, we're going to get a brand new DICOM object. Now, I can actually specify what type of modality do I want this object to be, so I can make it whatever I want. Say I want to make it ultrasound for some reason, no problem. And then when I click add a series, it is going to actually add that new image into our study out here. So you can see that I've added one before, just testing it out. Both are pictures. As I click on them, you can see that within this picture series, right, I now have an instance. This instance has a UID that uniquely identifies it. And as I click on it, there's the whole DICOM header out here with whatever elements we know about are obviously visible within the DICOM header. Now, of course, once I've added this series, not only can I analyze and view the DICOM header, I can view the image itself. I can either look at it directly from the instance viewer, which we'll get to in a second, but you can see it out here, of course. There's that secondary capture that I've taken, but we can also view it directly in the viewer, in the default viewer that's connected to or integrated with Orthanc. So in my case, this is of course OHIV. So just to show you, as I click on this little eyeball, I'm taken over to OHIV viewer, and this is my secondary capture. So this is first secondary capture, second secondary capture, as it'll load for me in a second. In OHIV, but you can see that actually it's veterinary X-ray. Otherwise, that's what I have in this study. Otherwise, prior to me adding these secondary captures. Now, obviously, as we move down to the series level, so again, this is where we were. This is the study. This is the study level modifications that we were looking at. And then if we move down, then we've got the series level. But the series level, we have our own ways to modify this, but now only this specific series. So what can I do? I can download the zip, I can delete this specific series, and then I can also modify or anonymize. With respect to download and delete, I think those are pretty self-explanatory. When we look at modify, as I click on modify, again, we have three options out here. I can move this series to an existing study. I can move this series to a brand new study, and I would create a new study at that point. Or I can just modify tags within this series only. So if I click on change study, again, what I would have to do here is I would have to specify the study instance UID. And if you're not familiar with this, study instance UID is the unique identifier that identifies a study. A unique identifier at the study level. So if I wanted to move it, and this is where the copy thing is very useful. So if I go and I look at a different study, so you see that anonymous is one study, this one sent to PACS is a different study. So for example, study instance UID is very conveniently placed right here, so I can copy it. And then if I go over to the series out here for the second study, I can click on modify, change study, paste my study instance UID, and then I can click on modify, and then modifications, of course, being processed, and then you can see the modified resources. So ultimately, the anonymous study has gotten a new series, and it's this one out here, and that's the one that actually contains the images that have the veterinary X-rays. The second option at the series level, and I know this can get a little bit confusing, so let's close this up. So at the series level, so we start with the study, and then we move to the series. Of course, if we go to modify the series, the second option is to create a brand new study. So at this point, what I would have to do is I would have to specify patient ID, whatever that happens to be, patient name. I can make it whatever I want. And, if I want to specify, I can specify the other components too. And then as I click modify, what's going to happen, and especially as I click on show modified resources, I'm going to have a brand new study belonging to the patient test. And then, of course, there's going to be the dreaded CR, 5 instances of CR images. Again, if I click on the viewer out here, I'm going to be able to view those studies. So what we've done is we've taken those 5 images of this particular dog out here, and we move them to a new study. So if I click on patient name out here, you can see that the name is actually test and the ID is 12345 as we specified earlier. Now, our last option as far as modification is concerned is modify series tags. Now, in this particular case, then we're not moving it to a different study. We're not creating a new study. We're keeping the existing study. And in the world of DICOM, that means that we're not actually touching the SUIDs, right? So that's that other third option. And in this particular case, I can modify certain tags that pertain to the serious level. And again, there's a few options that Orthanc provides us with here. Those are the same options that we've seen before. We can make the modification, modifying the original series, but generating new DICOM UIDs. So we're going to then basically modify the whatever tags we're modifying here, whether it's manufacturer, modality, series, instance UID, or series number, or all of them, but also generate new DICOM UIDs, which is why DICOM series UIDs is auto-generated. The second option, of course, is to modify one tag, but keep the series instance UID. Again, what does that mean? That means that we're just modifying a certain DICOM tag. So it was actually CR originally. We can change this to DX if we wanted to, another way to encode plain films, but just that, not create a new copy, not modify anything else, just that specific tag. And then, of course, your third option is to create a modified copy of the original series. So that means your original copy stays as is, but we're also going to create another series, and we're going to also have one attribute modified. So in this case, the series instance UID, the way for your system to uniquely identify a series, is going to be auto-generated. We're going to have a new tag DX, but the original one is also going to stay. And then, of course, the lowest level, or the most granular level, is the level of an instance, which, as we've discussed multiple times, is just another way to say the word image. So here's our instances, or in other words, images. There are 5 images out here, the 5 x-rays of that dog. And then, of course, at the instance level, as we've already established multiple times, first of all, you get to see the entirety of the DICOM header, which is very useful. So if you need to analyze the entirety of the header, this is where you want to head to the instance level. But then you've got the 3 buttons out here: view that specific image, download, and delete. Download and delete, very self-explanatory, whereas the view simply opens a separate tab with just that image rendered. So not an OHIP viewer, not any other viewer, but just that specific image rendered in a separate tab. The one thing worth mentioning here is that the download button at the instance level is the one that allows you to download the actual DICOM file. Every other level downloads a zipped archive, which you would have to unzip. Okay, and now the very last part, the only thing that's left, is this section right here, the sidebar that we need to look at, because there's a few very important functions available in here as well. The good news is that the top section, all local studies, which effectively houses the 2 work lists without labels and the label research, we already talked about. So as you remember, we're able to take any given study, and then if we wanted to, we can assign a label, whether a new one or existing one. And if we add this particular label to a new study after closing it and refreshing it, I should be able to see the newly added study to the research folder or research work list. The next button out here is upload, and this is a big one. So what's happening is that unless you know how to configure a DICOM connectivity to another archive or another DICOM device, this is really your only way to really add studies. Now, I'll be very honest with you, this is sort of a last resort. It's a lot better to use DICOM means to transfer over studies, but if that is not an option or you just haven't configured it yet, most certainly Upload is a way to add studies to your instance of Orthanc. What's important to understand here is it's really straightforward. You can either select a folder or you can select files, but it's important to understand that the files have to be DICOM. So you can see I've got a bunch of PNG files out here. If I try to export one of those or upload one of those, that it does not work. So what it wants is it wants a DICOM file. And I'll show you if we have a DICOM file, which I just happen to have one out here. I can go ahead and upload that particular one. And that is actually going to upload just fine. And I want you to take a look at this because we now have a brand new study. So if we look at all of them, there's this new study that I've just uploaded, which effectively only contains one image. So one series, one instance. It's a CR, and it's this upper extremity hand AP. So that's a very important tidbit. You want to know how to add studies, even if you don't have another DICOM device connected. All Jobs is very useful for troubleshooting. It shows you background tasks in Orthanc. So, for example, uploads, exports, transfers, processing tasks, they would appear here. Again, very useful when checking whether a study import or other operation has completed successfully. Then the next component out here is the settings. Now, primarily when it says system info, that's for the most part that you're going to get out of this manager. That's because most of the configuration is actually done through modifying a orthanc.json file, which we'll take a look at in a separate video. So yeah, for the most part, just information about your system. The one thing that you can set here is the verbosity level. Now, you may be wondering what that even means, and it's a technical term. It effectively defines how much information will Orthanc write into its logs, right? So it's for troubleshooting. Ultimately, if we're going through normal operation, then you may want to write less things into the logs, and that is quite sufficient. But if we're troubleshooting, if we're actively troubleshooting something, then in this case, you may choose to temporarily increase the verbosity level so that it writes more into the logs. But what's important is this does not affect how it displays studies. It does not affect how studies present, none of that. It simply has to do with how much information is being written into the logs of Orthanc. If you're just starting out, keeping the verbosity level at default is perfectly fine. That's actually where you kind of want to be. And then the last thing out here is this guy right here, Legacy UI. So if you click on this, it takes you to this interface, which is the other user interface that is available in Orthanc. Now, we'll take a look at it separately, but obviously outside of scope for this video. If you ever click on this and you want to go back, just click on Open Orthanc Explorer 2 and you would be returned back to this familiar screen. Change the language of your instance of Orthanc. So if you ever needed to, it's actually quite easy to do. We won't be doing this for this video. We'll keep it as English. Well, and that will be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe for more videos just like this, and stay tuned because more videos related to Orthanc are coming soon.